You could apply just about every one of the 7 deadly sins to this homicide. Greed, lust, envy, anger.
A brutal killing.
The first thing that came to my mind was ambush. Someone waited for him and shot him.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
We had suspicion that there may have been an affair.
There was an actual fight between the two of them. He said, "There's this guy I know that wants him killed."
The truth will be revealed.
He started crying and said, "Yeah, I'll tell you everything."
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Merrillville, Indiana, a thriving community just southeast of Chicago.
We have a little bit of everything. We have a large residential area. We have a large business district. It's one of the largest towns in the state of Indiana.
On average, we're usually in the single digits for homicides. We were leading up to a holiday weekend. This was the day before Good Friday, when we received a 911 call. Initially, dispatch said that there were shots fired and that there was a man down.
The victim is 33-year-old John Parker.
John had a vacuum cleaner, door-to-door sales business. He was an amazing salesman. He was hardworking, and he was successful.
He's rolling along one high to the next, and this terrible thing happened to him.
Detectives Donald Toth, Robert Wiley, and Jeff Rice are given the task of hunting down the cold-blooded killer responsible for John's murder.
When I arrived, what I saw was John Parker laying on the ground outside of his vehicle, directly in front of their business office.
John was struck once. The bullet entered lower behind the ear to the back of his head.
The crime scene itself was what I would call fairly pristine. In other words, there wasn't a lot of evidence to be had there.
There were no signs of struggle. There were no signs of a fight. Initially, the first thing that came to my mind was ambush. Someone came up from behind and shot him, and he very likely never had a chance to see or hear what was going on.
From the very beginning, we knew that this one was going to be difficult.
Detectives turn their attention to reconstructing the last 24 hours of John Parker's life.
The timeline of the victim, where they were and what they were doing, is crucial to any good investigation. And when we look at the people involved, be they suspects or witnesses, finding where they are when this occurred is very important. The only witnesses that we located when we got there were Ben Love, the office manager, and Judy Parker.
Judy was crying. She was obviously upset, which we understood as the wife of the deceased. She said that that night, probably at 6:30 or 7 o'clock, John and Judy had gone out to dinner at a local restaurant.
My daughter calls me and said, you know, I'm taking it to Walmart and I need to get it done. When you get out and said, I've got it at the office. It's all this stuff. I didn't pick it up real quick on the way home.
They finished their dinner. They went back to the business after the restaurant.
Both of you walking together.
We walked in together.
Are you opening together?
And Ben was asking us, well, can I just go home? John's like, no.
Just said,
Yeah, I'm out of here. And when I got in the car, sat down, and I, looked up, and I seen John coming out of the office.
saw him through the window.
I saw him through the window. This is when I reached down to get my cell phone out of my purse. And then John came, and I seen him coming, so I looked up, and he passed the door. And he opened the passenger door, and he says, well, I'm getting this food for Ben. And okay, that's fine. And that's when I turned back around. And then all of a sudden I hear, and I see somebody go in. I see a figure. And I get out of the car. I see him laying there. And I stood there for a second and I went to John, touched him. I said, John. And I went back in the office. And I opened the door and I go, Ben. I go, Ben, call the police now. Call the police.
Judy really gave us nothing other than this mystery man dressed in dark clothing that she only caught a glimpse of.
Generic? Yes. But that's your starting point.
They shift their focus to the office manager.
When we talked to Ben, Ben's emotional state was that of just being completely stunned. Ben said that when John left, he went to the bathroom, and then when he came out of the bathroom, Judy was inside the business and said that John had been shot. He said that from the bathroom, he didn't hear any sounds. And since he was in the bathroom the whole time, there was nothing Ben could give us.
Although Judy and Ben are unable to provide anything concrete, police still manage to develop a theory.
His Rolex watch and his big gold ring were on his hand. No one went after Judy's purse. Also, it's our industrial area, and it is somewhat secluded.
The opportunity to rob somebody is nil. So it just didn't seem like a random event. It seemed something more personal. And we asked Judy if there was any enemies.
Who do you think would have done this? You could have, not even what, I mean, in your heart of hearts.
I have no idea.
One of the first steps was to do our victimology on John. We wanted to see who he was, what he was about. John made his first million when he was in Michigan, before he was 35 years old.
He was able to build this vacuum cleaner franchise into considerable wealth.
And it shows his work ethic and his drive. He knew what he wanted, and he knew where he wanted to be in life. Judy worked for John in Michigan. John fell for her right after meeting her. He was just smitten. Judy had 2 children from a previous marriage, Christina Hicks and Danny Hicks. I believe Christina was 16 or 17, and Danny was about 15 years old. John had picked up the family and moved them down here, and renamed the company J&J Industries to be John and Judy Industries.
When investigators are looking into a businessman that was murdered in front of the business, obviously you want to get a little bit of insight on how he conducted business. Did he have a bad business deal? Did he owe someone money?
Here we have a victim who, from a relatively young age, became a multimillionaire. To move that fast in his business, he likely stepped on a lot of people. And whether that fits into the motive for the death, these are all items you have to look at.
Since we had already talked to Judy, who was the last person with him, we wanted to talk to his brother to see what had gone on in case something had happened to spur this ambush. David was very angry and very upset when we met him. He began immediately talking about an altercation that John had had with an ex-employee about a week or so prior to the homicide. The employee's name was Quentin House, and apparently there had been a dust-up in the parking lot between John and Quentin. David told us that they started yelling at each other and there was pushing, physical grappling between the two.
Detectives learn John fired Quentin after only 1 week.
John was not an easy person to work for, and he could be difficult as a boss. He could be very demanding. He was not afraid to swing the axe. If you were not pulling your weight, John would drop you in a heartbeat.
There's always a possibility that someone could have been that upset at work and that they would take it to the level where they want this person dead. It could be that Parker pissed off the wrong individual.
Detectives have identified a man John Parker argued with days before his murder. Disgruntled former employee Quentin House.
To have someone very early in the investigation that may have had a beef with our victim was a terrific lead. Quentin House said the employees were required to make a certain amount of sales demonstrations to get paid. But Quentin said he was required to do more demos than he was initially told. He said, you know, I worked there a week and I was supposed to get $400 and I didn't. He had said that he refused to do these demos. And that's why they had words in the parking lot. Quentin House told us at the time of the murder that he was at his friend's house and that they were playing Xbox. He was forthcoming. He gave his friend's phone number. We definitely had to spend some time verifying his story to make sure that we had a very good picture of what happened that day. And it became evident to us that Quentin House was alibied and that we had to move on from him.
Police continue the search for leads in John Parker's business affairs.
We made it a point to talk to every active employee that was at J&J Parker at the time of the homicide.
What we ultimately determined was that there was a romantic relationship between the office manager and Judy.
What we were learning was that there were several employees that would either stop by work to check their schedule or would come in when there shouldn't have been anybody there, and Ben Love and Judy Parker were caught having sex by several different employees.
Obviously, Ben became a suspect. We didn't know if he was trying to get rid of John to be with Judy and possibly take over the business. So our investigation more focused in that direction.
They bring Ben Love in for a formal interview.
Ben was smooth, he was mildly charismatic.
Ben denied that there was any sort of romantic relationship between them.
He stated that he and Judy were great friends, that they worked very well together, that they were a great management team. and that he was, just like a member of the family.
But Ben's proximity to the murder was the problem. He acknowledges that he was there.
There was a great portion of that evening when he was the only one in the office. And the information that we had about what happened at that point came from Ben's mouth.
So you've either got Ben as the shooter, or you have an unknown third party that approached and committed the homicide. However, if Ben wasn't involved, he may possibly know about what occurred. We had to get him to break loose with any information that he had.
Under pressure, Love finally cracks and reveals an incident from a year earlier.
He said that Judy and John had brought her cousin, Tim Mendoza, up from Texas. Tim had had some problems down there, and he was given the opportunity to turn his life around. Ben and Tim Mendoza became roommates.
But the Parkers' act of generosity seemingly came with strings attached.
Judy's daughter, Christina, had come to the apartment, and she had asked to have a private conversation with Tim. Tim went into the bedroom with her. After Christina left, Tim came out of the bedroom bewildered. He was depressed, he was sad, and he confided in Ben. He said that he was not brought to Indiana to turn his life around. Judy had used her influence on John to bring Tim up here so that Tim could kill John Parker. We've never seen anything like this. This is the stuff that they make up for TV.
That's what gave us the first inkling that the family was involved.
We confronted Judy with that plot. She said that Tim had seen John be mean to her, grab her by the arm, or call her names, and that Tim offered to kill John for her. She told him not to even think about it. And at the time, she dismissed it because Tim had left to go back to Texas. But Judy didn't mention Tim until we brought Tim up to her. And Judy's story changed throughout the course of our interviews. When we started, it was that she and John were in love and they were successful. Everybody liked him. But the more we talked to her and started asking pointed questions, then it came out that John had a temper and he became less of the saint that she was painting the picture of the very first night. In my 25 years of doing this, I've seen the emotional arc after someone's killed. We watched her and her body language and the things she said, and especially the things that she did when we weren't even in the room. It was a little different.
Detectives want to speak to the other family member involved in the alleged plot, Judy's daughter, Christina. But they quickly run into a problem.
Indiana state law states that if a parent is a suspect in a crime, that parent cannot give permission for law enforcement to talk to their children.
We were contacted by an attorney that indicated that he was representing the entire Parker family, and he was putting us on notice that we were not able to approach or talk to them anymore.
But police can investigate Tim Mendoza's whereabouts at the time of the murder.
What we'd gathered from law enforcement authorities down in Texas was that, in fact, Tim Mendoza was locked up at the time and wouldn't have been capable to be the shooter on that Thursday night.
As Mendoza is ruled out, detectives receive a curious new lead.
We had a phone call from a school resource officer in Crown Point, which is the next town south of us. He told us that he had some information for us.
There were two kids called Earl and Kevin. They were residents in a juvenile detention halfway house where they were allowed out if they had jobs in school, kind of reintegrate them into society. They came to the attention of the Crown Point Police Department because Earl was found to have $201 on his person. And one of the rules of the halfway house was you didn't get to have cash. Their story was that they were scamming this kid from school.
It was ultimately told to us that they had received that money from Judy's son, Daniel Hicks, to have John Parker killed.
Detectives now have 3 new suspects in the murder of John Parker. His stepson, Daniel Hicks, and 2 of Daniel's friends, Kevin and Earl.
Danny Hicks is the second eldest of Judy's children. He did have his share of run-ins with law enforcement, with school officials. He's a bit of a wild child. We had felt at that time that we had a very large break in the case, that we had discovered a conspiracy to commit this murder. But we still don't have the trigger man that killed John Parker. So we needed to find further evidence, again, to corroborate the story.
The same state law that blocked an interview with Christina also bars their way to Danny. Their hope now lies in connecting Kevin and Earl to the murder.
When we talked to the individuals at the juvenile center, we were able to confirm that Kevin, in fact, was detained at the facility on the night of the shooting and would not have been involved in that particular homicide.
Detectives learned that Kevin's co-conspirator, Earl Dantzler, was already out on the night of the murder and has since vanished.
The timeline for us seemed to be similar to that of our homicide, which made us very suspicious. We had put out locates on him. Every person that had a snitch in every town was told to look for him. His picture was passed around. His name was thrown around. Earl was everywhere and nowhere all at the same time.
The hunt for Earl does, however, throw up a new lead.
We had a gentleman come to the police department and say that he had information that Mike Campion might be involved in the homicide. Mike Campion lived in the same neighborhood that Earl Dantzler lived in. I would say that he was locally infamous. People knew who Big Mike was. He was a local flap-about, for lack of a better word, didn't have a job, just kind of hung out and bummed cigarettes off people, and just wreaked a little bit of havoc when he could. We found Mike's roommates, and they had said that Mike had come into some money, and that was unlike him. He was buying things, and he was spending money on other people. And again, this led us to believe that he might have been involved.
They finally track Campion down.
He told us that he had spoken to Earl pretty regularly before and after the homicide. And he alibied himself by saying that he had been arrested in February, but didn't get out till April 20th, which would have been 3 days after the homicide. What we learned by checking the arrest records through the jail was that he had been out since March.
With his blown alibi and connection to Earl, detectives must now determine how Mike Campion fits into the timeline of John Parker's murder.
No matter how confident you as a suspect are that you are not going to confess, you should check that belief at the door. My clients always tell me they're not going to talk to the police. But when the police hand me over the disclosure, I see a 2-hour confession. The police will break you down. They've got the skills and they've got the time.
His story initially was that he talked to Earl, and Earl told him that he was hired to kill John Parker. He changed that story into, well, I did talk to Earl about it, and then I went there in the car with him. So we pushed him on some details. Then he admitted to hiding behind the dumpster with Earl when Earl ran out to go shoot John. He had a voice stress test where he was found to not be truthful. So then we really pressed him on his involvement. During the middle of the conversation, he put his shoulders down and his head back and he said, I want to tell you guys this one thing, but if I tell you this one thing, I know I'm going to prison. At which point, Don and I exchanged a bit of a look, and we said, go ahead and tell us. So then he tells us that it wasn't Earl that ran up and shot John Parker, but that it was him.
We asked him to show us how you approached him. Show us where you shot him. And Mike indicated that he had approached John from behind. He had shot him in the head, and that he left the area.
So we get the confession. All this work, all these people that we'd looked at, and we had someone that actually admitted to being the trigger man. At that point, there's a certain amount of elation.
I made the decision to detain him and incarcerate him at the Lake County Jail.
But you can't just go to court with someone's confession. Anybody's statement can get thrown out at any time. A crime as big as homicide and murder, you have to be able to corroborate the story and prove that it's true.
To confirm Campion's story outright, they need to speak to Earl Dantzler.
We had sent out feelers and we had done searches on family members of Earl and his grandmother, Dolly Villagomez. And we learned that Dolly had moved to Las Vegas. We reached out to Las Vegas PD. They sent detectives over there. And the detectives verified that yes, Earl was living out there.
Investigators went to Las Vegas to find him and put together a timeline compared to the time of the murder.
Earl confirmed that Danny had hired him to kill John Parker. He confirmed the transfer of the money with Kevin. But he said that he and Kevin put this plan together that they were going to take this money and there was nobody to report this to. Because how do you report that somebody stole the money that you paid them to go kill somebody? They felt that it was a perfect scam. But then Earl said he and Dolly moved to Las Vegas, and that was the last he had heard. He put Indiana in his rearview mirror and didn't know anything that had happened until we showed up at his doorstep. We tried to confirm where he was for the homicide. He was nowhere near the state. He was 1,800 miles away. And there was no way that logistically we could put him in the timeline of events that led to the murder of John Parker.
This throws Mike Campion's involvement into question.
The largest hurdle that we had with Mike Campion's story were his repeated conversations with Earl Dantzler. I saw Earl at the store. I saw Earl walking down the street. He told me how to make some money. Earl was in Las Vegas the whole time. He was never here. That was too big of a hole in his story for us to consider Mike Campion a viable suspect. I don't know what his thought process was, but we came to believe that he would rather be infamous than nobody. So he put out there that he was the one that pulled the trigger. It was a great story to tell.
I've read about him, and you hear stories about false confessions. I had never had one. Looking back after that interview, that was a false confession.
It was frustrating. It was. But by this time in our investigation, frustration was a daily occurrence. Every day it was beating our head against the wall, just trying to make a little bit of progress. Our suspect pool in this case was so large, we found it beneficial to just start eliminating people that it couldn't have been. And eventually it came down to Judy, Danny, and Christina.
Detectives investigating the murder of John Parker are now convinced his own family are directly responsible, but have no evidence to prove it.
We felt that all the pieces of the puzzle was there. There's just one piece missing. Judy Parker, Daniel Hicks, Christina Hicks. We needed someone there to feel a little bit of pressure, maybe to talk.
It's very frustrating when you have information that you believe is very relevant to the point that you could solve this crime, this murder, but you're prevented from getting there through a set of circumstances. You can't go home and have sleepless nights over something like this. You have to keep thinking of a way to get around it. Keep working on the case.
With Judy's lawyer blocking any interviews with the family, detectives need to find another way to place the gun in one of their hands.
One of our ploys was a flyer that said we were looking for information involving a homicide that occurred in Merrillville of John Parker. We must have handed out several thousand copies of this flyer. A short time later, we received information that 3 other students had actually been approached by Christina.
What we learned was that Christina was soliciting people she knew to see if they had a gun to sell. What we found out, she met a school friend in a parking lot of a local restaurant and had purchased a .25 automatic pistol. And this happened about a week and a half prior to the homicide. This was a huge break for us.
The prosecutor's office kept telling us, we want more. There's not quite enough. We want more.
We felt that it was necessary to serve a search warrant on the house. We showed up early one morning, knocked on the door. We woke them up out of bed. Everybody was in their PJs. It was a methodical, almost grid search of the house. But we didn't find the gun. To say it was a setback, it doesn't meet that standard. We were very upset. It let all the wind out of our sails.
It was frustrating to feel in our hearts with the interviews that we had and all this information surrounding Judy, Christina, and Danny that, hey, we want to charge.
Leads and new information were coming in less and less frequently. We learned that Judy and Ben had moved back up to Michigan. Danny had moved out to Arizona, and Christina had gotten married and was living locally.
We felt that we were so close that it could be solved but we just needed somebody to break. You just have to keep chipping away at it, and hopefully something will break loose.
In February 2006, 3 years after the murder, detectives get an unexpected break from an unlikely source.
Christina's husband, Eric, had some run-ins with the law, drug-related.
So we picked him up, brought him to the station. I started leading into if Christina had ever talked to him or spoke to him about the murder of her stepfather, and he said she has. He didn't know a whole lot of great detail, but I gave Eric enough information in the interview to let him know that we knew what had happened. In his mind, he thought, oh, they're all caught. They're done. We asked him, I said, are you willing to go in and speak with Christine? He said, I'm willing to do anything to get out of this trouble for this drug warrant. He gets in his truck and he drove home. We followed behind. He goes up and started speaking with her. And he's telling her, you gotta speak to Detective Rice. He's a nice guy. He knows that you're involved. He knows that their mom's involved. You need to go in and talk to him. And she starts crying. She goes, okay, I'm ready. I want to go in and talk to him. I do.
Detectives have finally broken through to one of the conspirators in the murder of John Parker. His stepdaughter, Christina.
She told us Judy planned this out and sold everyone on this plan. Judy had a game plan for her riches. She had a game plan for how she was going to get it.
Christina admits that John was killed for his $1 million life insurance policy.
Judy was able to convince everyone that once the insurance paid out, she was going to take care of everyone.
And Judy kept telling them, we'll all get basically a piece of the pie. She didn't care about anything but that money. During the interview with Christina, she gave detail how her mother gave her money to go purchase the gun that actually was used to kill John Parker. And she said that Danny was the person that shot and killed John. And Judy forced him to do this. It was disturbing to know that Judy was setting up her own children to kill her husband because she couldn't find anybody else to do it.
When we approached Danny out in Arizona, I made the statement to him that, you remember me, I'm Detective Toth from Merrillville. We just talked to Christina yesterday, and she gave us everything. And I think it's time for you to come clean and talk to us about why it happened. And at that point in time, he started crying and said, yeah, I'll tell you everything.
Danny was just overwhelmed with the stress and the emotion that he'd been holding in for all these years. And he admitted that it was him.
Christina and Danny's confessions, along with a detailed timeline, give detectives a clear picture of John Parker's final hours.
John spent most of the day with his brother. That night, probably at 6:30 or 7 o'clock, John and Judy had gone out to dinner. They dined at a local restaurant. Before they left the restaurant, Judy had made a phone call to home and spoke to Christina.
Judy called home because Danny needed a head start. He needed to be at the business waiting for John.
Christina gives Danny the keys to her car. He's not even old enough to drive. takes her car, drives it all the way into Merrillville, parks at a local business, and walks up and hides behind a dumpster.
At approximately 9 to 9:15, John and Judy travel to the office. They went in, spoke to the manager, and came out.
Danny walked up behind John. And shot him in the back of the head.
You have to put a lot of blame on Judy because Judy was the adult. I think Judy convinced the two teenagers, whether it be by greed or ignorance.
Judy Parker, Daniel Hicks, and Christina Hicks are arrested and charged with murder.
Christina got assisting of criminal charges, and she got the least sentence. Danny got sentenced to 23 years, and Judy got 33 years for orchestrating the actual homicide itself. It is a tragedy. John fell in love with this lady. He took her kids in. He made them part of his family. They were all going to reap the benefits of his hard work. John was ambushed. Cut down in his prime. Nobody deserves that.
It saddens me that something so silly as money would make them want to do that. But greed was probably one of the first evils, you know. What's the Bible say? The love of money is the root of all evil.
There's no doubt in my mind that she brainwashed Danny and influenced him into killing her husband. I kept thinking back and looking at that mug photo, and I'm seeing this little boy. I felt for him that his mother made him do this. She's an evil person to make her own child do something so evil.